Well, friend, we are wrapping up Jonah chapter 4 today, and what a chapter it has been. Haven't we seen God's heart of grace here once again? This story of Jonah has just been dripping with God's grace. Very, very interesting chapter this week. Not an easy one. I don't know, it's a little ouchy, it's a little prickly. We are left to ponder, do we have hearts united with God's heart of grace? So, what happened? How would we summarize this chapter? Well, friends, we saw in the beginning that Jonah is exceedingly displeased. He is angry. He's so angry that he wants to die. And this is rather shocking. It's a shocking turn of events. And we have to ask why. And Jonah explains in his prayer to the Lord, he explains. And by the way, this is a little side. I admire Jonah's prayer. I really do. I don't know if I've said that this week, but Jonah is flat out open and honest with God. Like, he's angry. Is he going to be able to hide that from God? No. So he just lays it out there. He is open. He is honest. He is authentic with the Lord. And I really appreciate that about Jonah. I appreciate his example in that way. It's the same example that we have in the lament psalms. These psalmists laying out their hearts, bearing their souls before the Lord, lamenting in their frustration, in their anger, in their grief, whatever it is, they take it to the Lord until they are able to work through it with Him. So really, really important. Like that's a takeaway. That's something I take away from Jonah's example. Yes, this reminder to be open, to be honest with God so that we can work it out together. We can work out our frustrations with the Lord until we can completely trust in Him. All right, that was a little bunny rabbit trail, but what do we see? Jonah, chapter 4, day 1. Jonah is so angry, and he prays to God. He lays out his anger before the Lord, and he tells the Lord. He gives us an interesting detail. Like, this is really important that we understand what Jonah knows about the Lord. And he says, Lord, I know you are merciful, you are gracious, you are slow to anger, you are steadfast in your love and faithfulness, and you are a God who relents from destruction. I know this about you. So love that. Like, Jonah is a man, he's a prophet, so he knows the will of God, he knows the heart of God, and he knows how to interpret the will of God. So he even knew before he went to Nineveh that God would relent. If the people repented, God would relent from disaster. Jonah knew that. So clearly, Jonah is a man who fears the Lord. He has an awesome, he looks to, when I say fear, it's not that he's afraid of the Lord, but he has a reverence for the Lord and his ways, and he understands the Lord's ways. But nonetheless, he is angry, and we have to ask why. And I don't know that we can get to the very bottom in understanding, but friends, we discussed this week that, here's the enemy. Here's Jonah's enemy. Here's the Israelite enemy. These are, in their eyes and even God's eyes, evil people. So Jonah sees them worthy of God's destruction, worthy of God's punishment. And in a sense, don't you think Jonah is judging them himself? And he's kind of wallowing in his own selfish desires that, yes, they get the wrath of the Lord. And it's so interesting because we know Jonah himself has received these things that he knows about God. He has experienced them for himself. He has experienced God's mercy, his grace, his slowness to anger, his abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, and relenting from disaster. Jonah was dying. His life was fainting away when he was thrown overboard from the ship into the tempest and the raging seas. He was drowning when God relented from disaster and appointed that great fish to swallow him up and rescue Jonah. He saved Jonah. God relented. So Jonah was very pleased when he was on the receiving end, but we see an issue here. We see a disconnect when it comes to others receiving God's mercy and grace, and specifically the enemy, evil people receiving God's mercy and grace. And this should cause us to step back and pause and reflect and take a look at ourselves. And God tries to help Jonah along, doesn't he? He asks Jonah one question to kind of wake Jonah up, I think, to wake him up and basically say, Jonah, take a look at yourself. Take a look at your wrong thinking here. He just asked Jonah, do you do well to be angry? Friends, I'm going to hold on to that verse and to that phrase, to that question. Carmen, do you do well to be angry? Most likely not. I mean, do any of us ever get to righteous anger? I don't really think so. Yeah, we are human. Do you do well to be angry? There's something about surrendering our anger to God and allowing Him to be the judge, Him to determine how to handle people. So the beautiful thing is God asked Jonah this question. Here's a time for Jonah to step back and answer that question. Jonah just goes outside of the city of Nineveh and he's going to watch. Like, he's still hoping that God will destroy this city of Nineveh. And God gives him a little teaching lesson with this plant, right? God appoints the plant. He makes it grow. He makes it come up over Jonah, provides this beautiful shade for Jonah. Jonah feels the grace in that. He is exceedingly pleased. He rejoices. He has much joy in being, again, the recipient of God's grace. But this plant isn't just any ordinary plant. This is a plant appointed by God. It was appointed to grow, and now it is going to die because God appoints a worm to eat away at its roots and cause it to wither. And then God will appoint a scorching wind to come over. And Jonah's going to be sitting in the heat. Like, Jonah, again, has time to think about God's grace, being a recipient of God's grace, and then what it feels like to not have God's grace, but to have His discipline, to have His destruction. Jonah gets a taste of that. So, friends, again, I think we see... I don't just think, I know we see God's grace to Jonah here. God is giving Jonah a teaching lesson. What is God doing? Just like God picked Jonah up to set him on the right track. When Jonah was told to go to Nineveh, but went this way to Tarshish, God did His good work in Jonah's life. He picked him up and He set him back on track. And in a sense, God is using this plant to set Jonah back on track in having right thinking, in having a right heart, in thinking and to think like God and to have a heart united with God's heart. Pretty beautiful, isn't it? Like, I don't know why. I get goosebumps just realizing how great God's grace is and that he doesn't give up on us. We know Jonah is a believer in the Lord, but he is off track in his thinking. He's off track in his heart. His heart is not aligning with God's heart of grace and mercy and slowness to anger, is it? So this gives me hope, friends. This is our God, and he is equally as merciful and gracious to us, that he will set us back on track as well. Oh, let's just be moldable in his hands, right? Let's pray for hearts to be united like his heart. So Jonah is very angry when this plant dies. And once again, God asks him this beautiful question: Jonah, do you do well to be angry ... over this plant? Over a plant. And then God speaks to Jonah, I think, in a very direct way, a very truthful way, but also a very gracious way. He's just saying, look, Jonah, you feel this over a plant. Over a plant. Isn't it okay that I should pity, that I should have compassion upon these thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people of Nineveh and the animals that live there? And that's where this story ends, with this question for Jonah. You pity the plant. Should I not pity Nineveh? That's the question before us. That's the question. Like, when we think about it, we put on our ancient Near East Israelite glasses. They were the recipients. They were the original listeners of this story. I think there would have been silence at the end of the story as they grapple with this question. The original listeners would have been blown away by God's grace for the people of Nineveh. I think their hearts very much would have aligned with Jonah's heart. They would have wanted to see destruction for this people of Nineveh. And they would have had to grapple in the same way that Jonah does over God's grace. And what a mind-blowing example. Just what a mind-blowing way God highlights his heart of compassion and grace and mercy, and the way that he relents from destruction to the people of Israel. And he does it through the people of Nineveh. He does it through those sailors that was on the ship. And he does it through the life and thinking and heart of Jonah. Oh, friends, I love it. I love it. This passage, this chapter ends with us being called to just consider, remember God's heart of compassion. And I think grapple with this idea of, is my heart, our hearts united with God's heart of compassion? Absolutely beautiful. I love it. Friends, I hope to see you tomorrow. It's always good to end a study, wrap up, and ponder and think about what will we take away from our time in Jonah. So I'll hop on one last time. I hope you'll join me. I'll look forward to it.